Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Andrea and this video is going to be a reading vlog. The first book that I have on my list is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I've read one other Riley Sager book, which was The Only One Left, I believe, and I almost gave it 5 stars. It was a 4.7 for me. I really enjoyed the book. I think I read it within like 2 days, so I'm hoping for that same vibe and motivation for this one, because if that happens, then this video is just going to be so great because I'm gonna feel so productive, and I'm hoping to eat this up. So I'm gonna read a little bit what it's about. I don't know yet. I don't know what it's about yet. I remember I got this book and another one at a bookshop in San Francisco, and they just seemed like good reads, but I don't even think I read the synopsis of it. I just knew that I liked a Riley Sager book. This one I think is fairly new, so I was excited to get into it. So this one is based off 25 years ago. Maggie Holt and her parents moved into a rambling Victorian estate called Bainbury Hall. They spent 3 weeks there before fleeing in the dead of night, an ordeal her father recounted in a spooky memoir that became a worldwide phenomenon. She may have been too young to really remember what happened, but Maggie doesn't believe a word of her father's book. Ghosts, after all, don't exist. But now Maggie is back at Bainbury Hall and is beginning to believe that there might have been some truth in the fiction. That, either way, someone or something doesn't want her here, and that she might be in danger all over again. So it seems as though this Maggie character is going back to the house where she used to live in, and she's not a believer of ghosts. I am a believer of ghosts, and I'm very scared of that paranormal stuff. So hopefully this is good. I'm excited to read that. The next 2 books I have are a duology. I think it's actually, there's more books to this series. It's not just a duology, but I only have the first and second book, and I'm hoping to like them and then continue on, but I haven't read the first one. So the next book that I have here is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. And again, I haven't read any Frida McFadden books. Actually, I may be lying. I think I listened to an audiobook from her, and it wasn't my favorite. I don't know if it was because I was listening to it. Maybe if I was reading the book, I would have enjoyed it more. But there were some parts of that book that I didn't really like. I found it cringy at times, but I did finish through the audiobook, so I want to give this author another try. I know that she's very popular and she has a lot of different books and they're very highly rated, so I'm excited to get into this book. Again, I'm gonna read the synopsis for you, but I mean, if you read a lot of books, you probably heard about this one. So there has 2 parts. There's a big quote and then this white area, and I'm gonna read this white area. Every day I clean the Winchesters' beautiful house, top to bottom. I pick up their daughter from school and I cook a delicious meal for the whole family before heading up to eat alone in my tiny room on the top floor. I try to ignore how Nina makes a mess just to watch me clean it up. How she tells strange lies about her own daughter, and how her husband, Andrew, seems more broken every day. But as I look into Andrew's handsome brown eyes, so full of pain, it's hard not to imagine what it would be like to live Nina's life. The walk-in closet, the fancy car, the perfect husband. I try on one of Nina's pristine white dresses once, just to see what it's like. But she soon finds out, and by the time I realize, my attic bedroom door only locks from the outside. It's far too late. But I reassure myself, the Winchesters don't know who I really am. They don't know what I'm capable of. Honestly, that was the first time I read the synopsis of this book, and in my head I feel like I already got stuff spoiled because I didn't know that this lady was going to be trapped in her room. But I should have noticed, I should have known by the cover of this book. But you know what I thought about this cover of this book? I thought it was a housemaid, and I thought she was a nosy housemaid and there was a secret within this house, and she wanted to know what that was. I didn't know she was going to be trapped in her room. So hopefully that's not, obviously it's not a big spoiler because it's in the synopsis of the book, but but I hate spoilers. So I'm not gonna read the back of this one because it's the second book and I obviously don't want to know what happens. So the third book that I have on my list is The Housemaid's Secret, which is the sequel to this one. Hopefully I really like the first one so I can read the second one, because if I don't like the first book, it's really hard for me to read the second. So now I'm gonna move on to the fourth and final book, which is Stephen King's The Outside. I remember seeing this book at the library, I think when I was in elementary. I may be really wrong, like maybe this book came out and I was already like in high school, but I feel like I remember this cover. I haven't read a Stephen King book. I know that he's just the king of horror, I know that, but I haven't read any of his books, so I'm really excited to read this book, obviously, and I'm gonna read the synopsis for it because I have no idea what it's about. So, a living nightmare has come to Flint City, Oklahoma, as an 11-year-old boy is found brutally murdered in a local park, an unspeakable crime that rocks local law enforcement to its core, as the most heinous atrocity anyone there has ever witnessed. Equally stunning is the identity of the prime suspect, Terry Maitland, one of Flint City's most popular cities, as well as a Little League coach. Oh, popular citizens, sorry. English teacher and devoted husband and father, Detective Ralph Anderson, whose own son Maitland once coached, orders a quick and very public arrest. Multiple eyewitnesses and irrefutable evidence mean an ironclad case, until the investigation expands and horrifying new details begin to emerge. Terry Maitland seems like a nice guy, but is he wearing another face? When the answer is revealed, it will shock you as only master storyteller Stephen King can. I hope you understand me. I hope you understood me. You know, speaking English is hard sometimes. I think from all the synopsises that I've read, this one sounds like the darkest. Like actual horror. This one seems more like mystery. And this one gives thriller vibes, so I'm excited to read all of these books. Hopefully, I'm gonna start off with Riley Sager's book because, as I mentioned, I've read one of his books before and it took 2 days to finish. So I'm hoping that this is gonna kickstart this whole video and I'm just gonna be like, oh my god, this is so good, and I'll be like telling you like I couldn't believe this part, like I'm already blah 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 pages in. I'm excited for that. So I'm gonna start this book now and you'll see how it goes. I have a little reading buddy. I still need to name him. He's going to be following me throughout this reading journey and I'm really excited to have him. I have company finally. I need to make him a little book and he's gonna be reading with me every time I read. Look at that face. The cutest. It's day 3 of reading my fall bucket list books, and I left off reading Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I'm currently on page 57, so not too far. I'm in chapter 3. So for this book is reminding me of A Haunting of Hill House. If you've ever seen that show on Netflix, I really like that show. I guess the book just switches off between Maggie and her father, like his book, his novel that he had written, talking about what took place 25 years ago, and now it's Maggie in the present tense. That makes sense. But yeah, so far I really like it. It's not as fast-paced as I was hoping, but I'm not disappointed. You know, I feel like it takes me a little bit to get into books, so if anything, that's normal. I also wanted to give an update on The Outsider by Stephen King. I actually started reading this book as well. I started listening to it on audiobook and I am on page 76. So more into this book than this one, but it's because I was listening to an audiobook on my way to work. So I got pretty deep into this book, and this book I also watch a lot of like true crime documentaries, and that's what this book is reminding me of. In the beginning, or this portion that I've read so far, it's a lot of interviews. In the synopsis, you know, how can I, like, you know who the villain is, right? It tells you in the synopsis when I read it. And it's sort of interesting because I feel like typically when you read a murder mystery, you're trying to figure out who it is. And within this book, they tell you in the first couple pages, or it even tells you in the synopsis. So it's sort of interesting to sort of go on from the story. So that's how it sort of feels like a true crime. It's like one of those resolved murder mysteries where it's like, is it really resolved? Like, did we actually get the correct guy, right? So it's really interesting. There's just so many characters. And I don't typically read a lot of books at the same time. Before, I would just read one book, finish it, and then start another one. But I don't know what's up with October. I'm like in between 5 different books. So I don't know what that's about. That's like, I had books that I was in between, like in the middle of, before I started this whole video. But I was like, hey, I told myself I wanted to read these books during the fall, and I'm going to do so. So there's that, but that's a whole other story. So I'm 76 pages into this book, and I'm 57 pages into this one. I'm gonna read this one a little bit more, and then hopefully by the next update I'll have more to say. Hi. If you watched my last fall video, you recognize the setting and you recognize this me, because I'm in the same spot. So that's just there for the people that have watched the other video. But I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna give you a little update on the books that I'm reading. So it's day 11 of reading. I finished Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I was thinking about the rating for this, and I landed on a 3.5. I'm really picky when it comes to rating books. Like, I don't really give books 4 stars or even 5 stars. It's really rare. I don't know exactly what I base it off. I think part of it is how I feel towards the book, because I know that reading is very subjective. Like, people have different opinions on it, and depending on like what genres you like, you're gonna rate it higher and blah blah blah. So this is just my way of rating it. So I rate it based on like how this book made me feel. Like, did this book make me want to keep reading it? And that could be with like a thriller, a mystery, a romance book, a literary. Like, are these characters in my head that I'm just like, oh, I want to know what happens next? Like, I'm so excited like reading this book. Am I like, oh, I guess I have to read it, like I want to finish it? You know, like, how am I feeling about it? And then another aspect of my rating is like the story and the plot and the characters. Are they fully developed? Like, are they cringy? Or, you know, like, that's another thing that plays into my head when I'm reading books. Like, if for me they're cringy, then this book is gonna have a low rating because I don't like the characters. And I'm a very like character driven person, I think, when it comes to reading. Like, yeah, I think that's what I focus on. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to have like an interesting plot. Like, I can literally read about a girl's day-to-day life, as long as there's like character development and I don't know, like I'm excited about the character, then I'll keep reading it, you know? So I think that's another aspect for me. And then I couldn't come up with another one. I think that's what's in my head right now. Anyways, I gave this book a 3.5. I had talked a little bit about it, how it was reminding me of The Haunting of Hill House, and towards the end, like, it's not exactly like it, so don't think like, oh, I've seen Haunting of Hill House, so I know what's gonna happen in this book. Like, don't think about it that way. It's just like similar vibes within the family and the house. But I really like this book. I think the last 100 pages were really good. Like, I think that's when I sort of was like, oh, okay, like I want to finish it, like I'm excited, right? Like, I'm thinking about this book. But at least for me, it was hard to get into it like the first 100 pages. So the last 100 pages was good. I was reading it, I was eating it up. The first 100 pages was a little slow for me. And I don't know why. I mean, it's easy to read. I think it's easy to understand. As I mentioned, the point of view changes from the daughter and the father's novel. I don't know if I did mention that, but there's 2 points of views in this book, which is pretty cool. I enjoyed the daughter's point of view more, like that portion of the story. I liked reading her side of things more than the father's. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. I don't want to give spoilers, so I'm just gonna stay with my rating, explain a little bit about the book. The plot twists. I am gonna say there was, like, I didn't expect where this book went. So that's good, right? Like, I think if you're reading a thriller or like any kind of mystery, horror, whatever, and you have like an inkling of what happened and then that happened, and then that happens in the book, you're sort of like, oh, I knew it. Like, I don't know, I think when you read these books, you want to like be surprised, right? Sort of like anticipating something and you're like guessing and then you're like, oh, I'm wrong. Like, how did that happen? How did I miss that? Like, that's sort of like a part that's fun about reading books. And I didn't really guess it, but also I wasn't necessarily in the headspace of like trying to guess what happened. You know what I mean? I was just reading, seeing what happens. But I think the plot twists were pretty good. I had a good time reading it, so 3.5. Moving on to the next book, I had mentioned that I was listening to Stephen King's The Outsider on audiobook, and I continue to do so. I'm on page 225, which is almost halfway through this book. It's a really big book. I don't know how many pages it has in total. I don't want to spoil anything, but from the looks of it, it seems like it has like 560 pages. That's a lot. I think I'm gonna continue to listen to it on audiobook and switch off reading it physically as well. This book is really dark. I don't get disturbed easily when I'm reading books, but I do want to say that this has some very dark topics. If you're the kind of person that likes to know like the trigger warnings of a book, then you should search up the trigger warnings for this book because it just talks about it a lot. Yeah. So aside from that, I think I had mentioned that this book had a lot of characters, and it still does. And for me, that's a bit confusing. I mean, it's less confusing listening to it on audiobook because they change like voices and stuff. But just when a book has a bunch of different characters that you're following along, it confuses me a little bit, like the story, how it's going. You know how sometimes when you're reading and then you're sort of like, what happened? And then you like read back up, right? And then you read it again and you're like, oh, like I even did that with the audiobook. Like I was listening to the audiobook and I was like, wait, what? And then I had to like go back and listen to it again. But so far it's really interesting. Again, it still like reminds me of like a true crime documentary. There are some like twists in it, as in, again, like this is the type of book where I didn't like what has happened so far. I didn't see it coming. Like I didn't know that was gonna happen. I was like, oh, okay, now what? Like, how is this story gonna continue? You know, one thing that did bother me about this book is that there's a character that is from Mexican descent. And I don't really like the parts where it talks about like when it brings up this character and then this character just says like, oh, I'm just like a little Mexican guy from, like, what? I don't know. I don't think, like, it's like they wanted to put diverse characters in there and they don't know how to portray them. I don't know, like I wish I was reading it physically so I can like tell you what page and what quote I'm telling you, but since I'm listening to it in audiobook, I don't know like what chapter or where it was, but there's like little aspects of it. He's a I think he's a detective. I might be confused, but they talk about a little bit about his background and how his parents were like farm workers and stuff, which is fine, but it doesn't really go in depth about it. It's sort of I don't know how to explain it. Like, I'm from Mexican descent and my parents are farm workers, and I just felt offended when they mentioned like the way that they mentioned that in this book. It's sort of like, okay, like that's weird. Like, I've never said that, you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any sense, but I don't like that aspect of it. It sort of like threw me off guard, like, okay, like it's weird. But again, that might have just been me. And then, so I'm gonna try to read this book physically, but continue it in audiobook as well because I do have it. And it's a pretty long book. And then the third book that I had mentioned that I'm gonna read is this one, so that's what I'm gonna start today. Again, my hopes with this one is that I read it like this because that would just be so great. I mean, I love being so interested in a book where I can't put it down. Like, if I'm able to read a book in one sitting, beautiful. You know, like who doesn't like that feeling? Hello, this is my final reading vlog update. I ended up finishing Stephen King's The Outsider. I just completed it through audiobook. I think the first 30% of the book was really interesting, and then the last 70% was just not my cup of tea. If you don't want to hear spoilers, you can just end the video here because I'm going to talk a little bit more about this book and I'm going to include spoilers. So towards the middle-ish of the book, they introduced a supernatural character called El Cuco, which is supposed to come from like this Mexican legend, El Coco or El Cucuy, and that, like, those are the terms that I know this legend from. So I know, like, it can also be called El Cuco, but for me, like, it just sounded a little bit ridiculous. Not just because of the name, but because how they were explaining this character. Like, I think this would have had a higher rating if I was physically reading the book. I don't know if I just have something against the narrator. But once that character was introduced, I was just like, no thank you. And don't get me wrong, like, I love supernatural books and reading about that, you know, but this just wasn't it. It was not it. I just found it very cringy. I know. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. Maybe I was just not in the best headspace for this book. But yeah, I had more to say about it, like talking a little bit more about the character. But honestly, I'm tired. I feel like I've been talking about this book to like my boyfriend and my sister and just like talking about how disappointing it was for me. So I'm a little just tired of talking about that. But yeah, doesn't mean I'm not gonna read any more Stephen King books. I think they're still like interesting in the way that this is, I feel like a lot of thrillers or romance books nowadays, they're very similar, like they have similar concepts, and I feel like this one was very different. So I think that's interesting, and I feel like I'm sure a lot of his books are very different. So I'm still like interested in reading more of his books. It's just the fact that they're so long, and I feel like a lot of the time, a lot of the like monologues of characters just dragged out a lot. That's just my opinion. Now, I'm gonna get into The Housemaid. Oh, I didn't mention, it took me 19 days to finish this book through audiobook, and then that doesn't mean that throughout like every day in those 19 days I was listening to this book. It just like, I started this book 19 days ago and then I finished it, if that makes any sense. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about The Housemaid. So this is my second Frida McFadden book. The first book that I read was The Perfect Son, and I think I gave it like 2 stars, like around there. I haven't finished it yet, but this is gonna be my last reading update because I've been so close in DNFing this book. I'm sorry. The main character is so cringy to me. I hate that she's in love with the husband. So basically it's this lady and she's working as a housemaid to this family, and she doesn't really get along with the wife because she has some mental illness issues, and I just don't like the fact that the main character is in love with the husband and wants to sleep with the husband. And anytime we're getting anywhere in the story, she's just like, oh my god, like he's so handsome, like oh my god, like I need to stop thinking about him, I can't, he's my boss. And I'm like, girl, like I just want to get to the mystery of this. Like in the back of this book it mentions how she ends up, I think when I had read the synopsis of this book I had assumed that she ends up like locked in the attic room where she's supposed to be staying, but I'm like 50% done with this book and it hasn't happened, and maybe it happens in the other 50% of this book, but it's sort of like, I don't know. I am not liking this book. I am not liking the main character. I am not liking the story. I don't like any of the characters. Like, I don't like the husband. I don't like the wife. I don't like the kid. Like, everything is just ugh. And I'm trying really hard just to finish this book and not DNF it, because I'm already 50% done. Like, what if the other 50% is really good, right? And it makes me want to read the sequel. But from this point that I'm at right now, I think I might just finish this book and then I'm gonna unhaul it and unhaul the sequel, because I don't even care about the housemaid's secret. I don't care about the housemaid, so why am I going to care about her secret? I really don't. So I don't know, I feel like this month was just really bad reading wise. I got through some books, but they weren't my favorite books, which is so interesting because I feel like this year for me has been so strong and I've been reading like 4-star books, and this month just wasn't it. Or October wasn't it, because right now it's November. But I do have some exciting reads for November, and I'm just hoping, fingers crossed, toes crossed, that I'm gonna like those books. But for now, this is my wrap up of this reading vlog. I'm sorry if I just gave out negative energy. I'm just very picky. I'm sorry. I wish that any book that I pick up I'm going to enjoy and I'm going to just love, you know? Like, that's the dream. But that's not this reality. So if you stayed to the very end of this video, thank you. You know, I want to put out more content like this because I like reading books. I have a whole list of books that I want to read. I love books. So I want to do more content like this, and hopefully the next reading vlog is very positive. But that's it for me. I'll see you next time.